Hello and welcome to Reasoning Through the Bible. My name's Glenn and I'm here with Steve. Today we have a question on whether or not it's good for Christians to compromise, because our passage today, we have some people asking the people of God for a compromise. Let's sit down and talk and come to a compromised agreement. And so we have to struggle with whether it's good or whether it's sometimes bad to compromise. And so if you have your Bibles, turn to the Book of Nehemiah, the Old Testament Book of Nehemiah, chapter 6, and a little bit of review. We have our man Nehemiah, who has come to Jerusalem. God has laid a burden on his heart for the people of Jerusalem and to rebuild the walls. We have seen him plan. We've seen him come to a good plan and get all the approvals before he took the vision to the people, so that once the people caught the vision, they had direction and they could start immediately. And they've been making good progress. Nehemiah has done a great job of motivating the people of Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. And so here we have, as we've seen, there are some opposition to the work. And Steve, a question for us today. Do we today as Christians, do we have people that oppose the ministries that we work in?
We absolutely do. We have good support in many areas, but then we also do have that opposition. And really, we always have to keep in mind that the opposition is coming against God himself, against Jesus himself, and not so much us personally. But yeah, there's opposition that comes all the time from all different types of ways and that it comes about. Just like we've seen in Nehemiah, we've seen the escalation from name calling to actual threat of physical violence. And we're going to see it today, how the opposition even changes now.
And generally, it's, as you said, it's not that they oppose us so much, it's they oppose the Lord and his message. And so why is that, do you think? Why is it that people oppose the Lord's message, and they even go out of their way to oppose the Lord's message, when oftentimes it'd be easier to just ignore it?
I think that it's a proof of Jesus Christ being the one and true way and the one God. And the reason I say that is this: if you're out there and you have different organizations, or you're trying to proselytize for other Eastern religions, especially here in the Western world, they'll listen to you and they'll say politely, no, thank you, I'm not interested, or they'll go their way, or they don't want to argue with you. They'll just let you believe what you want to believe. But when it comes down to talking about Jesus Christ specifically and God specifically, then there are some of them that they just get angry about it. And the question is, why are they getting angry? You're just telling them about Jesus, just as if you were telling them about Buddha or some other type of Eastern religion God. Yet when you mention the name of Jesus and start talking about him, they will get angry. And some of them even to a point of physical anger, because they just don't want to hear it. To answer your question is, I believe it's because there's a truth in it. And they know that there's some sort of truth. And they know that through that, they're going to have to be held accountable for what they do. And they just don't want to be held accountable at all.
I always found it ironic that people will go out of their way to fight against God and his message. Especially atheists will go out of their way to fight against God and his message. And atheists don't even believe he exists. So they get very worked up and spend a lot of energy on fighting against something that they don't even believe is there. And that's what we have today. We see it in Nehemiah's day, and we see it in our day. So in Nehemiah chapter 6, now when it was reported to Sanballat, Tobiah, to Geshem the Arab, and to the rest of our enemies that I had rebuilt the wall, and that no breach remained in it, although at that time I had not set up the doors and the gates, Then Sanballat and Geshem sent a message to me saying, "Come, let us meet together at Shephram in the plain of Ono." But they were planning to harm me. So I sent messengers to them saying, "I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you?" They sent messages to me 4 times in this manner, and I answered them the same way. Now, Steve, it seems to me here that the enemies of God are paying attention to the Lord's work. Sanballat was from Samaria, which was, good distance away, like 2 or 3 days walk away, but yet he's paying very close attention to what's going on in Jerusalem. And at this point, he's been trying to ridicule them to stop work. Now he says, let's sit down and talk. Let's meet halfway in between you and me, and let's sit down and talk, and we can work out our differences. So what's wrong with sitting down and talking? Wouldn't it help solve some of the conflict?
It's not sitting down and talking. It's where he wants to sit down and talk. He wants to pull Nehemiah out away from the safety of Jerusalem and the safety of the walls, and wants to get him out into an open plain so that they can supposedly talk. But this is right after Sanballat and Tobiah and the others have threatened physical harm to attack Jerusalem from all sides. And so now we've seen this escalate. They weren't able to stop the walls from being built. So now they recognize, if we're going to get Nehemiah, we have to pull him out in the open somewhere where he's going to be vulnerable, because Jerusalem is no longer vulnerable.
We have these men, Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, that lived in another area, yet they were paying very close attention to what Nehemiah is doing in Jerusalem. In our day, do non-believers pay attention to what Christians are doing?
Yeah, they watch us, and it's a curious matter that they do watch us, because what you just mentioned a while ago, they don't even believe in God, or at least they say they don't, but yet they sure are wanting to know what we do and how we do it and why we do it. And they keep a watch and eye on us, and they'll come in behind us and try and take away what we have actually built. So we might be making progress in spreading the gospel, and then come to find out later, they're coming in behind us, tearing down what we've started to establish.
Look at the end of verse 1. It's Nehemiah has a progress report on his project he's doing here. It says, at that time, no breach remained in the wall, but they had not set up the doors and the gates yet. With this, we have one more clue about the character of this man, Nehemiah. He gives a very accurate report of where they were. He doesn't gloss over anything. He's not exaggerating or minimizing. He gives an exact report on what we do. And so with this, Nehemiah is honest, and he tells it like it is. This makes me think about how many times I've seen people, and I must admit, sometimes I've even been guilty of sometimes exaggerating successes or minimizing failures. But Nehemiah doesn't do that. Nehemiah gives an exact picture of how things are.
And this is at a point in time whenever the project is coming to the end. And that sometimes happens on large projects. You have these little areas that you have to finish up, but yet they're key areas. There are things that couldn't be implemented until the infrastructure has been built, but they're important things that got to be done at the very last part. And so we'll see that in project management, that right when you're getting to a point when you're going to implement and launch the project, you'll have people that have given you resistance. They haven't given up yet, and they still want to come in and torpedo or sandbag the project.
Look at verse 2. He says, come, let us meet together at this plain of Ono. And you alluded to this, Steve, but what was he really trying to do here? The excuse was, let's sit down and talk, and we can have some negotiations. We can meet halfway, because this place he proposes to meet was halfway in between.
Well, Nehemiah says right there in verse 2, he says, but they were planning to harm me. So Nehemiah still keeps his wits about him. He does not trust either of these people, and he hasn't trusted them throughout this whole episode of rebuilding the wall. And on one of our other episodes, Glenn, you mentioned that Christians sometimes that we're just naive and we're too trusting. And I believe that is the case in many times, that because we have a trusting relationship with fellow Christians and we don't mean any harm, sometimes we tend to believe and give people the benefit of the doubt and not keep our antenna up in as far as people wanting to harm us. But Nehemiah does keep his antenna up. He knows exactly what Sanballat and Tobiah are up to. And so he says, no, I'm not going to come out there and meet with you.
And what he's proposing here sounds good, right? It sounds good just on the surface of it. Let's meet halfway. We can talk. We can have some negotiations. And Nehemiah shuts it down. I can imagine what Sanballat's press secretary would say to the press. Oh, we wanted to sit down. We wanted to talk. We wanted to have some compromise and some negotiations. He won't even talk to us. He's unreasonable. If Nehemiah would have gone out there and met with them, would it have been productive? And would Sanballat and Tobiah have been reasonable?
Probably not, because they hadn't been reasonable this whole time. Another area, and probably what might have tipped Nehemiah off if they meant to harm him, is what are they going to negotiate? The walls are built. The only thing left are the gates. And so what are they going to negotiate? They're going to negotiate for him not to put the gates in? What type of negotiation would there be? So it's obvious that they've been hostile for almost 2 months now, while they worked on this wall the whole time. And now they want to come to some sort of a compromise or some sort of an agreement. It doesn't make sense and it doesn't add up. And so Nehemiah says, no way, I'm not going to come out there and meet you.
On a national level, our leaders are sometimes pressured to go make agreements with enemies, sometimes just for the sake of having an agreement. If we take that down to a Christian level, where we work in our churches and we do our ministries, we have enemies. Question is it ever beneficial to sit down and compromise with people that are struggling against us? And is there any benefit that can come out of that for us?
Well, I think compromise is a term that's overused, because compromise means that both sides give up something, that a demand that they have. Then they come to a compromised agreement. One side has given up some part, the other side has given up a part. That's the compromise. But it's an overused word. And just like this, Sanballat and Tobiah, they weren't going to give up anything. They still had the destruction of Nehemiah and the Jewish people as well. And so what is it that they're going to give up in order to have a compromise? Nothing. So what good are talks that you go into negotiate if the other side is not willing to give up anything? Then it becomes a useless exercise. And unfortunately, when some people realize that and they say, no, we're not going to have talks, the message of the other side not wanting to actually come to a compromise is lost. And what the media will do, or others, they'll just say, oh, this person doesn't want to have any type of a talk or an agreement. He's just stubborn. They don't report that the other side doesn't want to have any type of a compromise on their position.
The only way negotiations and compromise can have any benefit is if both sides can come to some situation where there's benefit for both sides. If one side's giving something up and not getting any benefit to it, there's no reason to negotiate. There's no reason to compromise. In this case, yes, there was some friction. And I'm sure Nehemiah, if you asked Nehemiah, would you like this friction to go away? He'd say, yes, of course. But where was the friction coming from? All of the friction was coming from the critics, Sanballat and Tobiah. they were the ones that were creating the friction in the first place. And now they're saying, oh, we could stop this friction if we just sit down and talk and maybe we could come to a compromise. There's no benefit to Nehemiah in going out there and talking. All it would do would be an entire negative for Nehemiah and the Jewish people, because there's no benefit that could come from this. In Nehemiah's case, the Jews would only come out the loser by having any sort of agreement with these people. If we take it to a national level, wars can be avoided. People's lives are at stake, and sometimes it's beneficial to have national talks on a national level. When it gets down to with Christian ministries and things like that, then with our enemies, there's no benefit from negotiating from this. All it would do in Nehemiah's case is pull him away from his work. And in that case, the critics would succeed and Nehemiah would lose. So that's where the only way there'd be any benefit in having any kind of negotiation or talk with an enemy is if there's some sort of benefit to us. And in this case, zero benefit to Nehemiah and the Jews, and that's why he says no. In verse 4, how many times did they come up and try to pull this scheme?
For it says 4 times in verse 4. 4 times they sent him this message to come out and meet with them, and 4 times he replied to them in the same way.
Nehemiah would not be distracted from the work, would not be distracted from the work. The next passage, starting at verse 5 and going down to verse 9, now they try still another tactic that's even more shrewd. So Steve, can you start at verse 5 and read down to verse 9?
Then Sanballat sent his servants to me in the same manner a 5th time with an open letter in his hand. It was written, it is reported among the nations, and Gashmu says that you and the Jews are planning to rebel. Therefore, you are rebuilding the wall, and you are to be their king, according to these reports. You have also appointed prophets to proclaim in Jerusalem concerning you, a king is in Judah. And now it will be reported to the king according to these reports. So come now, let us take counsel together. Then I sent a message to him saying, such things as you are saying have not been done, but you are inventing them in your own mind. For all of them were trying to frighten us, thinking they will become discouraged with the work and it will not be done. But now, O God, strengthen my hands.
So they send to Nehemiah a letter that's unsealed. In those days, most letters, especially to officials, would be sealed with wax and there'd be a seal on it, and it'd be like in our day closing an envelope. And you could tell whether it had been opened or not, and it only was supposed to go to that person. In this case, they didn't seal it. It was an open letter. They hand it to the courier, and the courier, of course, has to go. So what is the significance here of having an unsealed open letter?
I think that the significance is that you're opening the message of it to be talked about. The courier the whole time could read the message, and it's got some pretty serious charges in it. That the Jews are wanting to rebel, that Nehemiah is wanting to make himself a king. And so this courier, as he takes it, the natural tendency, human tendency is to tell other people. And you could also see the courier saying, well, this is an open letter. It's okay for me to be able to tell other people. So here you have possibly this courier starting to spread the message around to the outside people, and even getting back to Nehemiah's people of what the accusations might be. So it's another way, as I see it, as a way to undermine what Nehemiah was attempting to do.
By having the open letter, Sanballat is intentionally letting the general public find out about these accusations. And you hinted, Steve, at the seriousness of it. Why is it so serious? And what could possibly be the legal case here that Nehemiah could get sucked into with these accusations?
Well, rebellion against the king meant death. The king was sovereign in the area that he ruled, and nobody would rebel against the king. The king wouldn't stand for it. Any type of rebellion meant instant death. So Now Sanballat and Tobiah and the others, they can't kill Nehemiah. So they're going to work out a plot and a plan in order to have the king kill Nehemiah. That kind of sounds a little bit familiar, and doesn't it, in regards to people trying to have kings and governments try and kill the people, the enemies that they perceive?
Look at verse 6. What he put in the letter and the tone he puts in here. It is reported among the nations that, who reported it among the nations? Well, it was Sanballat. So think of what happened. These accusations, these accusing Nehemiah of setting himself up as a king, again, which, if true, would cost Nehemiah his life. So these are very serious accusations. It is reported among the nations that you are. Well, yeah, who's reporting it? Well, you are. So the person that sent the letter invented the accusations, put it in an open letter that he knew would get leaked out. And so he's trying to, he being Sanballat, is trying to shape public opinion against Nehemiah. And I submit, Steve, this exact same technique is used in our day amongst our political leaders, in the sense that when we have one political party wanting to win an election over another one, they do this exact same thing right out of ancient Israel. They will invent a falsehood against the other political party, and invent it out of thin air, leak it to the press. The press reports it that, oh, there's all these stories out there that you've been doing such and so. And now it distracts the other opponent from what they're trying to do. That's what he's doing here. Sanballat invented an accusation out of thin air, leaked it to people, trying to shape public opinion and distract Nehemiah. And he used a very serious accusation. And so the people that would be hearing these rumors or reading this letter, oh my goodness, all they know is what they read or heard about in the letter. We as Christians need to not be gullible, because in our nations, we have things that appear in the press about our leaders, sometimes about our pastors, that are just total inventions and are lied to in the media in order to shape our opinion. And so we need to be very careful about what we believe about rumors that are happening, both small areas like around our church, but also in large things in our country. If we have accusations by enemies of our leaders having some sort of gross sin, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. We need to be very careful and investigate for ourselves and not get sucked up into these kind of accusations. Did Nehemiah fall for it? How did Nehemiah respond to this dirty trick? Well,
he responds to it by calling them out and saying none of these things are true. He categorically denies it, and he says, "You're just inventing these ideas." And there's one way, the way that you described, of just making something up out of thin air on an accusation. There's another way of taking something that is partially factual and twisting it in a wrong way and assigning it in a different way to make it appear like the party is guilty. Possibly this came from Zechariah. Zechariah wasn't a contemporary of Nehemiah, but he had his ministry ended around 40 years before Nehemiah came around. But remember, they had come back first with Zerubbabel to rebuild the temple, and it got stopped. Ezra had come. And so this had taken place over a period of years. And Zechariah's prophecies did talk about a king coming at some point. But we know that what he's talking about is the future return of Jesus Christ as king. That's the prophecy that Zechariah had. But here it is, if that's the case, that Sanballat hears these prophetic messages coming out of Zechariah, and he comes up with a plan to invent it to say it's talking about Nehemiah. So there's two ways: out of thin air, and then also taking something that is actual, but assigning it to another person.
If we look at verse 8, we have Nehemiah's response. So how did Nehemiah respond to these very public, very serious accusations?
that he's inventing them out of his own mind, that he's just making the stuff up.
And I find this very interesting because, again, these are very serious accusations. Nehemiah could have, again, been tried for treason, and Nehemiah just dismisses them out of hand, saying, you've invented that, and I'm not going to deal with it. I think that took strong character, and I think it took very strong focus. If you look at the pattern of these enemies over the course of the book, they start out small, they start out just laughing at them, then they ramp it up to ridicule. Now they've cranked it up to, we want to go over here and just have some talk, some compromise, pull you away from the work. Now they're making very serious accusations that could get this man killed if true. And so they are determined to pull Nehemiah away from his work, and he will not move. He will not budge. God has given me a task to do. He's given me a ministry to do, and I'm going to stay here and do it. You've invented all that out of your mind. I'm staying here and staying working. Do you think that took great courage?
Well, it always takes great courage to stand up and not buckle to what the opinion that is being made, the narrative that is being made by the opposition, and standing the course and saying, this is stuff that you're just making up. And in verse 9 there, Nehemiah mentions, here's the motive. He's trying to demotivate the people, discourage them, make them become frightened, because here's this accusation of rebellion. Well, the people would also know, if we're following Nehemiah, we're going to be accused of rebelling as well. And so that brings fright amongst the people to where then they don't want to follow Nehemiah or follow the person that's making the false accusations against. So we see Sanballat and Tobiah once again trying to separate the people from Nehemiah so that the work will stop on the walls.
How do we apply this to our day? One of the things, unfortunately, that Christian leaders in our day have to be prepared to deal with are these same types of accusations. In our day, Christian leaders will get false accusations. They will have lies. They will have distractions, people trying to pull them away from the work. There's going to be threats of legal action. There's going to be gossip, mean-spirited public accusation. Stephen, in just recent years, we've had an increase in the amount of time that pastors of churches have had to make decisions. Am I going to put myself in potential legal jeopardy by doing no more nor less than having church on Sunday? Or am I going to go ahead and do it? And so there were pastors that were threatened with arrest if they did no more nor less than met as a church. And so leaders in our churches need guidance. They need biblical discernment. They need clarity of focus, like Nehemiah, because there will be all these things, threats of legal action. There's going to be lies. There's going to be accusations. And those of us that are just common church members need to be very careful about what we believe about accusations about our leaders. And those of us that are leaders need to have a singular, strong focus, just like Nehemiah.
And it's incumbent upon us to go and research and find out whether or not accusations are true. You would like to think that you could trust the media that's reporting the narrative. In this case, it might have been the Courier. We don't know for sure. But let's use that as an example, hypothetical. If it was the Courier, do you think the Courier went and asked Nehemiah his side of the story before he went and spread this word far and wide that was in the open letter? Probably not. That's not human nature. And so you have this open letter, you have this narrative, false narrative that's spread that doesn't have the other side. And from our perspective of the leaders that are being accused, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we investigate thoroughly to know whether or not the narrative is true, the accusations are true. And we can't always trust just one or two news sources. We have to go and look different places in order to do it. And that's something that we need to do on our side. If we do nothing more but just perpetuate the same narrative, then we're not doing any service, and really that starts turning into gossip.
Well, I think Nehemiah's response to this very serious public accusation was the correct one. He dismisses it out of hand. He tells them, the things you're saying are not true. I'm not going to be distracted. And the very next verse, what does he do? He goes to God in prayer and says, God, please strengthen my hands. Keep me at my task. Give me strength to deal with this. That should be our response. We should not be pulled away from God's work because of false accusations by non-believers in the public. And we should pray to the Lord for strength. And that's why we study these books way back here in Nehemiah, because it gives us very practical application for today, things that are right up to date. And so that's all of our time for today. We're going to be back here next time reasoning through the Bible, and we trust that you will as well.
Thank you for watching and listening. May God bless you.